Welcome to Hip Hop Time Machine Episode 3. In this episode I'm focusing on phase, or how to get multiple microphones in phase with each other. When recording the same source, phase is hugely important as the source and the room it's in. Probably more important than the microphones themselves. Beautiful, expensive microphones can sound terrible if combined out of phase or partially out of phase with each other. On the other hand, humble microphones can give you a very usable result when applied correctly. To put this theory to the test, I will use a minimal setup, our second scenario from the previous episode. The setup consists of an entry-level kit in a typical London suburb house box room with a little bit of DIY acoustic treatment. The microphones introduced in the previous episode will be an AKG D112 used on the kick drum, an AKG C414 BULS used as an overhead, and two Shure mics, a Shure SM57 used on the snare drum and a Beta 58 used on the toms. I'm using the Beta 58 for recording this narration right now. I wanted to explore this more humble scenario first to see what sonic results we can get under these conditions. The objective is to attain the sort of feel and color heard on 50s Chicago blues records such as Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Little Walter on Chess Records. So I'll attempt to use as few microphones as possible and focus on a mono sound. When using fewer microphones, it's even more crucial to get the sound right on each mic, because there are fewer options later in post-production and mixing. Getting the sound right depends on the microphone choice, microphone position, and of course the source and the room acoustics. So I like to think of a microphone as an ear to the world, but it's not a perfect ear, it's quite colored in terms of frequency response, and we can use this coloration to our advantage. Microphones can also feature different polar responses, which is to do with their directionality, or in other words, the direction towards where they're more sensitive. A microphone can record all around it, or towards the front, or towards the back and front. In the previous episode I spent a lot of time tuning the skins on the toms and the kick drum, and I will continue to do so in this episode with the snare, trying to get it to my taste. Tuning is a whole chapter in itself, and in the high-end world of pro studios, experts known as drum doctors can often be hired just for this job before a recording session. Otherwise, drummers can be quite well versed in tuning drums themselves. But suffice it to say, there is no point starting to record unless the drums sound good inside the room. We're going to deal with drum tuning in a forthcoming episode. In the meantime, it is worth experimenting with tuning, using your ears, and trying to get a better source sound through trial and error. The skins I'm using are quite new. It's worth always putting fresh skins before recording and allowing them a few days to settle. When recording yourself, it is difficult to monitor accurately the sounds acquired from the microphones, as you cannot be in a dedicated mixing or control room at the same time as performing in the live room. For a workaround to this, I'm bringing a laptop with a DAW and interface into the live room, so I can test the microphone inputs, record, and listen to results right away. I'm only using a 2-input interface in this case, so I can check for the phase relationship of 2 microphones at a time. In a minimal or old-school scenario, the overhead mic is going to be the most crucial, so I'm using it as a reference point for all the other microphones. Starting with the overhead and kick mics, I'm positioning them to where I think I could get a balanced kit and kick sound respectively. The overhead mic is a large diaphragm condenser with a choice of polar responses. Large diaphragm condensers are less accurate than small diaphragm condensers, also known as pencil mics, but enhance the recorded reality in a complementary way. Here I'm choosing a cardioid polar pattern, which is again slightly colored, but focuses the directionality of the mic to the front or downwards, so that I can focus on the kit and less on the room and ceiling reflections. The kick drum mic is a large diaphragm dynamic, tailored for bottom end and beater presence, so I'm pointing slightly off axis from the beater to the inside skin, having removed the outer skin and halfway inside the kick drum enclosure. The closer to the skin or beater, the more top end you can get, and the further away you manage to capture some of the lower fundamentals. So this distance is crucial when only using one kick drum mic, as it becomes the balance of low to high frequencies in the recording before any EQ. Distance also introduces more room reflections, as opposed to the dry, direct sound, so these two dimensions, frequency and space, coexist, and there is a compromise to be made, hopefully with taste. In a similar way, the distance of a second microphone from the same source affects both the phase relationship between the two mics, but also the direct to ambient sound captured, so this is a crucial aspect for the overhead placement. So here I'm trying to attain two goals at the same time. Capture a tasteful and realistic picture of the whole kit, while being in complementary phase with the kick drum mic. Examining the recordings from these two mics demonstrates good individual results, but when combined together in mono, the sound weakens. This is most likely indicating phase issues. Zooming in on the waveforms confirms this. The positive and negative phases of the recorded waveforms are not aligned, so when summed in mono, one subtracts from the other. This is due to the overhead mic being much further and in the opposite direction from the source than the kick mic, the source being the kick drum, so it captures the generated acoustic vibration, translated as a waveform once converted through the interface, much later, at a random part of its cycle. After some experimentation, it seems that I need to distance the overhead mic too far or too close to get them in phase. If too far, the ratio of the ambient sound of the room to the sound of the kit is overwhelming on the overhead recording, and if too close, the overhead focuses too much on the snare and toms rather than the whole kit. And it gets in the way of playing. Of course, I could change the direction of the overhead, but I'm sort of going for a drummer's perspective, hence over the head. So if I want the sound, picture and ambience preferred on the overhead, but still want it to be in phase with the kick, it might be an idea to aim for a complete out-of-phase recording, 180 degrees out of phase, and then invert the phase on the preamp. This is the best of both worlds. Now, why not invert the kick recording instead? Well, I think it is better when the sub or woofers on the speakers are moving outwards or in phase with the bottom frequencies of the kick. Repeating the experiments for the snare and toms, I'm able to position the snare mic almost totally in phase with the overhead, which means I will also have to invert the phase on the snare preamp, and the tom mics totally out of phase with the overhead, which means the preamp can stay as it is because the overhead is already inverted. On the toms mic, one of the toms seemed to reach the mic a little later than the other, which created minor phase anomalies in relation to the overhead, but angling the mic towards that tom sorted it out. The snare was more problematic because I didn't want to compromise the direct versus ambient sound any further to get fully in phase with the overhead. And I liked the overhead sound, so I didn't want to move that either, especially as it had become my anchor for all the other mics. A small or partial phase issue is not rare on records, and it is known as comb filtering, more like an EQ artifact rather than obvious cancellation. And this is a compromise to be made according to taste, and also the other parameters, direct and ambient sound. Getting too close to the source, like a snare, can focus in too much, micro-zooming on an inch of the skin, rather than the totality of the snare, so I'd prefer some complementary phase than an unusable snare sound. The key word here being complementary. There are tools for micro-phase alignment in post-production or even during recording, and in the digital world, waveforms can be moved ever so slightly for perfect phase alignment after recording. This can aid phase issues in post-production if mic positioning has been exhausted against the limitation of the recording scenario. Join me in 2 weeks' time when I move to the control room for some capturing of all the mics and mixing. Until then, happy phase basting and tasteful mic positioning.